Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Actually, this might apply to Path of Exile 1 as well in the future. And this is likely the most important video I'm going to put out during 0.3.0 teaser season, because a lot of people are saying that the new trade system, the asynchronous trade that's being introduced in 0.3.0 is going to be the end of scammers and bad faith actors in trade. Those people are wrong, and if you listen to them, you might end up finding yourself in for a world of hurt. In this video, I want to talk about how people can interact in the new trade system with a little bit of care for some of the nasty traps that some people are going to set in order to take advantage of the unwary. 0.3.0 is adding the asynchronous trade system through merchant tabs. This is awesome, and it also allows unethical sellers to set new traps. These are traps that couldn't exist in the past, and they're going to be different to what you're used to. I'm disclosing these because a lot of people have worked out these traps already, and as a result, bad faith actors in the trade league economy will be using these whether I disclose them or not. Now, let's just quickly recap, how did dodgy trading work prior to 0.3.0? There were really two most common forms of what you might term bad faith listings. Now, these applied both to Path of Exile 2 prior to 0.3.0 and also to Path of Exile 1 even after 0.3.0, because this merchant tab system is not coming to Path of Exile immediately. It's probably going to come in 3.27, but it's not coming to Path of Exile 1 yet. The first one of these is to list an item at a price that you have no intention to sell at all, and then just completely ignoring all requests to buy it. Now, the purpose of doing this, partly it can be done just to annoy people, but the primary reason it's done is because you can then mislead and deceive people who don't understand this trap into undercutting these prices. So for instance, if an item is fair market value of 150 chaos orbs and you list a whole bunch of them up at 50 chaos, then someone might come along and say, hey, I want a quick sale, 49 chaos. Then either your alternate character or your accomplice then goes along and snapples that up, buying it instantly. And even if they price it at 60 chaos, they still buy it instantly. And because the alternate character or the accomplice has a pretty clean record in trading, they don't do any of this sort of stuff themselves, it's not likely they're going to be blocked by the person that's listing the item originally. And that tends to get termed as price fixing in Path of Exile 1 and also Path of Exile 2, and this is entirely gone. The second strategy people tend to use, and this is even more dishonest, is to list an item that's very desirable at a price that's only just a little bit below fair market price. You can do this way below fair market price as well, but that actually tends to make people suspicious, and most of the time people will go, okay, this item is really worth 13 divines, I'm going to list it for 12, because a price tag of 7 would make people suspicious. Then what you do is, instead in the trade window, you don't put in the 13 divine item, you put in something else that's practically worthless. So this strategy for exploiting the unwary buyer is entirely gone in 0.3.0 as well. I mean, you can still use it with the old trade system, but I think that most people who are involved in that sort of behavior are going to move over to the new system. However, completely new traps await. I want to quickly mention why I'm making this video, because advice on how to avoid any sort of bad faith actors in trade league economies in games, it almost always works in two different ways at the same time. Firstly, it lets buyers know what not to do in order to avoid getting scammed. But at the same time, it can also be reverse engineered into a tutorial for people who are interested in scamming. So I thought long and hard about whether I was going to make this video or not. And after chatting with a few people and seeing how many of them had independently come up with some of these ideas, I thought, yeah, this is going to be happening whether I make this video or not. So disclosure is the way to go. There is a persistent myth in online gaming communities, and I think that people who are involved in scamming actually promote this a bit. They'll promote a myth that game scammers are not very smart, that they do this because they can't make currency via other methods. That tends not to be the truth at all. They tend to be very, very smart, very, very cunning, and just a little bit more ruthless than most people are. The first thing I'm mentioning here isn't a scam in any way, shape, or form. It is a very painful mistake though, and so I thought I would put it in here just as something you should be very aware of as a seller. If you list an item for sale and you list it at the wrong price, well, if you priced it too high, it doesn't sell, but if you priced it too low, you're in for a world of hurt. As soon as the item gets locked in, and there is a slight time delay, we don't know how long that is, then it's going to be gone as soon as that happens. You intended to list it for 12 divines, you accidentally typed 2 divines, it's gone. You intended to list it for 12 divines, you accidentally put it in for 12 chaos, it's gone. The most likely mistake that you'll make that will be serious will be whatever is 1 above or 1 below the divine orb, or other currencies of comparable value, like maybe it ends up to the perfect exalted orb is a currency that ends up being used a lot. The ones that are 1 above that and 1 below it in the trade interface, those are going to be the things that the most painful mistakes are going to be denominated in. Let's start with the places you cannot lie in the 030 system, and then after that, we'll get on to the places that you can. In 030, you cannot list an item at one price, then substitute that price for another. The instant that another player sees your listing, they can transact. And that transaction will be at a price that you have made a game client enforceable promise to transact at. But it's important to note that this only applies to the item that they chose in the trade window interface, not to any others. Many items end up getting traded in bulk, and this is going to be the heart of the traps in 030's trade system. So let's talk about places you can lie. Apologies for the really low quality screenshot here. It's from a Grindy Gear Games video. All you really need to know is that this is a merchant tab entitled Zaf's Superior Staves, and I know my face is kind of blocking some of those words, and that there is a bow in it. Notice how the merchant tab name is making a promise, and then that is not being delivered upon by the items that are in there. And this is an example where a promise is made and not kept, but there's no malicious intent involved. Instead, it's just a convenient place to put a bow that's for sale from someone who is primarily focused on trading away staves. The key lesson here, though, is that the game client enforces absolutely none of the promises that you might make through stash tab names, nor any that a buyer might imply from items having proximity to other items. So this includes both harmless promises like superior or staves, but it also includes big promises that might either be explicitly made or that might be inferred from what's set up there. So let's start with the first of the 6 different methods that I want to teach you how to protect yourself from in 0.3.0. And this one's pretty simple. It's tab names that make promises about the contents that are not true. Now this is a Path of Exile 1 screenshot, and it's not in a merchant tab because currently we don't have merchant tabs. It's not like I can demonstrate what it looks like in the real game. But all you need to know is that the third item down here is somewhat special. The third item down is probably worth 150, 155 chaos over in Path of Exile 1 at the moment, which is around about 1 Divine Orb. And that's because it's what's termed a fully revealed blueprint. The other 3 of these items here are probably worth about 45 chaos, so about 30% of a Divine Orb over in Path of Exile 1 at the moment. So, what happens here? Well, a buyer sees that you've undercut the market by listing 155 chaos item at 150 chaos. So they come into your hideout and they go, yoink, I'm going to take that item number 3. Oh, this is a whole tab. I can pick up 4 at once. Oh, fantastic. And then they buy 3 45 chaos items, but they pay 150 chaos for each of them. The price in each case is genuinely 150 chaos. The thing is that the product they're getting is not what they thought they were getting because they have trusted a tab name, and that tab name is not being honest about the contents of what's found there. The tab name essentially is making a promise, the game client doesn't enforce it, and the seller involved is fully aware of this and decides to take advantage of anyone that doesn't pay enough attention. Additionally, what the person that is doing this will do if someone comes in and just buys the one for 150 chaos, they're probably off at the moment buying another couple of these for 152, 153 chaos, and then they're just going to replace it so that there's always one in there. That one acts as bait, it pulls people into your hideout, where they then get exposed to all of the other bad faith listings as well. Now, the second trade trick is very similar. This is about making a false promise with your tab names, but in this case, this one relates to prices. Reminder, the game client does not enforce any promises that might be made in your tab name. So here, we have a tab that is named 50 Chaos Prince. Hey, that sounds cool. All these items are legitimately worth 45 chaos. Maybe they'll end up being worth 50 at some point in the future, and then someone will come and buy them all. Well, the problem here is that one of these items, or perhaps more than one of them, are actually listed at 200 chaos. You have then gone and changed the numbers. Now, in reality, if you were doing this for real, you would probably make it a factor of 10 instead. So instead of listing 45 chaos items at 50 chaos and then having one at 200, you'd probably list them at 44 chaos and then have one of them, or more than one of them, that are 440 chaos or 444 chaos. Right, so this next trade shenanigan is a variant of the last one that we discussed. However, it's executed quite differently. This is one that I learned from my time playing EVE Online. The other thing that I learned from my time playing EVE Online is who the scammer types tend to target. We'll discuss this more later on, but essentially they're targeting people's FOMO and they're targeting the greedy. They're not targeting the ignorant, they're targeting the greedy. It's important to keep that one in mind because That's what this is all about. Here, you're listing items that are legitimately worth 153, 154, 155 chaos. You're listing a bunch of them for 150C, but one of them is listed for 150 divine orbs. Now, in Path of Exile 1 at the moment, that's something like 22,500 chaos. So it's a massive, massive increase. You can also do this in other ways as well. You can do it the way that the previous trade trick was talking about. But the key thing you're doing here is that you're pricing one of these items higher, but here the dishonesty is not in the number. The dishonesty is in the currency denomination instead. Now, most individuals that fall for this will end up getting saved. They'll get bailed out by the fact that they don't have 150 divine orbs in order to transact. However, a small minority of people will have 150 because those are the greedy people. Those are the people that game scammers are tending to really target. They're targeting the people who have already made a lot of trades, and then this time they let their guard down and they end up getting reset back to where they were quite some time ago. Now, the fourth example here of trade traps is going to be passing off ruined items as though they're good. And this is one of those cases where the mistake is entirely on the buyer's end, because sometimes people are just legitimately going to list an item for sale without any real deceptive intent here. Here is an example. I've just taken an item in Path of Exile 1 that is completely and utterly ruined. This is a crafting base, except it's kind of not really a crafting base because it's corrupted. As a result, it's immune to almost all forms of crafting in Path of Exile 1 and basically everything in Path of Exile 2. And as a result, this has basically no utility at all, despite having a reasonably favorable number of memory strands on it. But if this were placed in the middle of a tab that was full of actual crafting bases, then this fundamental flaw on the item is easily missed. And this is most often going to come up with items that have extreme chase corruption outcomes. A good example of this would be Path of Exile 2's Fireflower unique amulet, where you can potentially get one that is +6 to the level of fire skills, which is absolutely fantastic, but it's 1 in 72, and so you're going to end up with a whole swathe of failed Fireflowers. What might a dishonest person do? They can list one clean Fireflower in a tab at 3 or 4% below fair market price, and put that amongst a sea of corrupted ones. This will not always even be done with ill intent. Plenty of people will do this without any intention to be dishonest towards the buyer. Now, number 5 is what I term a regex trap. I can't give you a screenshot of this one until 030 goes live. But here's the trick. The seller has a tab that's full of waystones and they're listed at 3 exalted orbs each, except some of them aren't 3 exalted orbs. Some of them are listed for 3 perfect exalted orbs instead. Now, if someone does a search on this tab, they're going to type in the word exalt, and if it turns out the prices in merchant tabs show up in searches, then this is going to mean that those items are still going to show up when you do a search for exalt or even for 3 exalt. And so then someone can go along and think, oh yeah, I'll buy that, I'll buy that, I'll buy that. And they may not even realize until later on they go to craft and they realize, hey, I thought I had some perfect exalted orbs, and they're just gone. They've got no idea where they ended up going, but the seller of these waystones knows exactly where they ended up going. I think this is probably one of the most pernicious traps, and it's one you really want to watch for. Sixth and finally, we come to one of the more convoluted, but potentially one of the more devastating of these traps that bad traders can set. This is an implementation of something that was commonly done in EVE Online. In EVE Online, this scam was called the 3-ship Monty. However, it's not something that translates exactly one for one, but the core ideas are the same. The core ideas of the 3-ship Monty are that you are preying upon people's FOMO and that you are genuinely selling an item below market price, but you are selling that to an accomplice who is very, very ready in order to snaffle it up quickly. And then you're using that as bait to get people to buy something that looks superficially very similar and is much worse, or alternately, something that is an exact copy of the item, but that is priced far higher. You don't really need to know anything about EVE Online to follow exactly how it works there, except for really one or two things. Firstly, EVE Online has a currency called ISK, and it's kind of hard to compare it to Divine Orbs, but I feel like 15 million ISK is about the same amount of play effort required to earn as one Divine Orb. And that'd be true probably in both Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2. That's not exact, but it's the right order of magnitude. The second thing to note is that there are two ships in EVE Online called the Ishkur and the Ishtar. At the time I used to play the game, the Ishkur typically traded for about 24 million ISK, and the Ishtar typically for about 200 million ISK. This might be completely out of date now, because I haven't touched that game since it started going down the gurgler a few years ago. That said, they have very superficially similar names, and they also have the same color scheme, which means they can easily be confused for each other by someone who is in a real hurry. And they also have a big difference in their prices. The various ways that the 3-ship Monty would work all started the same way. You would place up a bait offer. This bait offer would be something you are selling at well below fair market price. So you might list an Ishtar at a price that would be appropriate for an Ishkur, or you might list an Ishtar just for sale for 150 million ISK, or something along those lines. However, you do this via a system where someone that is actively monitoring the listings that you're posting gets first dibs on actually buying it from you. So you've got an accomplice. They're ready to snaffle up your listing the instant it goes live. And that's the part that will correlate over to Path of Exile 2's 030 trade system. You have listed an item below market price, and you've got an accomplice that is sitting in your hideout and that is watching. The instant anyone else teleports into your hideout, they commit to purchasing the item. They're already sitting there with their finger on it, but they actually go snaffle it up. That means that the person that's teleported in is not able to buy it anymore. However, you then have very, very similar looking offers, superficially similar offers, like having an Ishkur that you put into the same spot as the Ishtar was in, or an Ishtar that is priced at 10 times fair price, or even at 1,000 times fair price. And every now and again, someone that's not diligent, someone that's greedy, someone that's got FOMO, they then end up committing to that trade when they really should not have done so. The key thing here is there are going to be a lot of people live searching for anything that's a commodity that gets underpriced, and those are the exact things that people will pull these sorts of shenanigans on. And fundamentally, the key thing that you're doing here is that you're dangling more appealing bait, and you've got your accomplice along in order to rip that bait out before the new buyer comes in. One more thing that might be a particular vulnerability here, and this is going to depend upon the exact way that Grandiga Games have coded the new trade system, is that a particularly nefarious trade lister might be able to then put a new copy of the item in at a higher price in the exact same spot in the stash tab. And that's one you'll need to be really careful about, because that's one that could be extremely, extremely painful to get hit by. The most important thing, how do you protect yourself? You must understand the mindset of bad faith traders. They're not thinking, I will prey upon the people who don't know any better. What they're thinking is, I will prey upon the people who are greedy, I will prey upon the people who are in a hurry, and I will prey upon fear of missing out. That is the mindset of bad faith traders in pretty much every online game that exists. So what you want to do is don't transact in a hurry on anything other than the item where the game client enforces every promise that's made by the seller. You come into someone's hideout, they've put an item there at a price that you're willing to pay. You go, yoink, I will take that item only. Then for every other item that you consider buying while you're in their hideout, I want you to wait 5 seconds and think about it. And I also want you to ask a few questions. Transact only after you've answered all of them. Firstly, am I being manipulated into making a quick decision here? Secondly, what promises is the seller making? Thirdly, is the seller actually keeping those promises? Fourthly, is the item corrupt, and if so, do I care? Fifthly, is this item denominated in the expected currency type? And sixth, is the price the amount that I expect of that particular type of currency? Only once you've answered all 6 of those questions, go ahead and transact on the items where the game client does not enforce any of the promises that might have been made to you. Anyways, I'm sure there'll be other ways that people manage to use the 030 trade system in bad faith. One more thing you can simply keep in mind. Whenever you're trading, assume that the counterparty to your trade is dishonest and assume they're smarter than you. Sometimes you'll be wrong. And when that happens, that's fine. You've lost nothing. But the one time that it's right, it'll end up saving you a world of hurt. I'm going to leave it there. May your asynchronous trades have interesting results.